All right, in this video I'm gonna derive the quadratic formula. It's kind of cool the way this works, and students like to tease. When I do this in class, I tell students, put your pencil down, don't worry about taking notes. Just try to follow me. It's not going to be on the test, right? Just try to follow me. That's what I tell them. And they get lost during it, but they can follow step by step. But it's kind of cool how we start with this and we end up with the quadratic formula. So we know what we want to do is we complete the square on this, which is what we did on the previous video, is completing the square. So to complete the square, well, let me first subtract the constant and put it on the other side. In order to complete the square, the leading coefficient has to be 1. So therefore, we got to divide everything by a, and we get x squared plus b over ax equals, let me put minus c over a. Now, to complete the square, we take half of the coefficient of x and square that. When I square this, we get b squared over 4a squared. So this is b squared over 4a squared. So I add b squared over 4a squared to both sides. Well, we know from completing the square and earlier, this is always going to factor to x squared plus half of that number, x plus half of that number, half of b over a is b over 2a. It's always going to factor to x plus half of this number, quantity squared. On the other side, well, we want to add these together. We need a common denominator of 4a squared, so I multiply this by 4a over 4a, and we get b squared minus 4ac all over our common denominator of 4a squared. Now we take the square root of both sides, and we get x plus b over 2a. When we take the square root of a square, we get a plus and minus. And we get the square root of b squared minus 4ac. The square root of 4a squared is 2a. Subtract b over 2a from both sides, and we get x is equal to minus b over 2a, plus and minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac over 2a. Now that we've got a common denominator, we can add these together, and we get x is equal to minus b plus and minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac over our common denominator of 2a, and that is precisely the quadratic formula. So completing the square is really an exercise in algebra, and when we solve quadratic equations by completing the square, that's a practice in completing the square. To solve a quadratic equation that doesn't factor, we would just use the quadratic formula. The purpose of completing the square is to get expressions or equations into certain forms so that we can answer questions about it, like a circle. A circle, we need to complete the square to get it in the proper form, x minus h squared plus y minus k squared equals the radius squared. Some equations aren't given in that form, and to get it into that form, we need to complete the square. That's really the purpose of completing the squares, stuff like this. But to be able to do that, to get good at completing the square, we solve quadratic equations by completing the square.